Jihagadich, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to tune back in and join us. I'm Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's, and I want to welcome you to a totally special conversation we get to have today. I want to talk to you just very briefly about, I know some of you guys right now are thinking about where does Jay get all of his fashion sense and clothes? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, this amazing t-shirt that I'm wearing currently, you can find at the Sinn Féin bookshop. It's a must-have for all occasions. Formal, casual, doesn't make a difference. If you get a chance, head over to www.sinnfeinbookshop.com. Pick yourself up one. It's pretty awesome. Show your support. But let's get to the topic at hand. We get to have a conversation today with famed historian, author, tour guide, host of this awesome, incredible podcast called Revolutionary Ireland, Mr. Lorcan Collins. How are you doing?
Hey Jay, I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having me on, and
Man,
thanks for the
time.
Thanks for the lovely introduction. And I love your T-shirt. It's lovely. It's great. I'll have to get my hands on one.
Thank you. We will take care of that. So I'm just curious. I want to get in and talk about the history and the storytelling that you're really amazing at. But I want to kind of start with you because I don't know that people actually know very much about you. They probably know your name from various books and lectures and whatnot, but where are you from? Where did you grow up? How did you kind of get into this stuff?
Well, Jay, I'm from Dublin, the capital of Ireland, of course, and I'm from a place called Walkinstown, and I moved to Kimmage then when I was sort of a teenager, and spent some time in England from about 18 to 21. Did a few jobs here back in Ireland, nothing that really suited me, to be honest with you. And then in about 1996, I had this sort of idea for doing something about the revolutionary period. So it just kind of popped into my head one day, why don't we do some kind of a walking tour about revolutionary Ireland? So that's basically it. It's a long time ago now. It's 25 years ago now. So I was a young man then, but it was something that a lot of people didn't want to talk about, to be honest with you. When I went to the Fáilte Ireland or the Dublin Tourism Board at the time, they were sort of aghast at this idea that I'd want to talk about our violent revolutionary past. And I was kind of surprised by their lack of enthusiasm. Now, we're great friends now, but in the early days, they were very, very suspicious of anybody who would want to talk about the old war years. One comment I heard from somebody was, "Oh, that's the Ireland we want to move away from," But I would be of the opinion that if you just ignore your history, you're destined to repeat it ad nauseum,
So had you been a fan of history like your whole life? Was it just kind of an older gratitude towards, or was it something you'd come up with?
Yeah, well, I was always very interested in that revolutionary period. I was always interested in the lockout, the 1913-14 labor struggles. And of course, nearly every young person of my generation were kind of fascinated with Easter Week 1916. And of course, Michael Collins and the IRA's fight for freedom from 1919 to 21 grabbed my attention as well. So I was always reading those kind of books, and I guess that's where I got the real interest from. I didn't go to college to study a degree in history, so maybe that's of some benefit that I wasn't immersed in the revisionist ideology that was going on in the 1980s and 1990s anyway. So I like a good story, and I think I come at this as somebody who hasn't been trained as a historian. I kind of know what the ordinary kind of guy is interested in,
That's that's a great wording. That's a great way to describe it. I want to get to your podcast because I think that's the topic I really want to get to, but I want to talk about your guided tour. Someday the pandemic is going to end. We're all going to be able to openly travel again. I'm looking forward to going back to Dublin and being able to go things. When it comes to your tours, kind of walk me through, like, what can people expect? Like, what is it that, you talk about? Like, how does it work?
Well, look, I mean, it's directed at people who want a little more than, the Molly Malone statue. Okay, like you gotta bring your thinking hat with you when you come on a tour. I'll feed information, but you'll have to kind of be alert for it. I feel if I had done some sort of tour like the Dublin's Fair City tour, I'd be a multi-millionaire after 25 years of doing it. But I chose a very obscure subject to concentrate on in the initial years, 1916. So first of all, you might be looking at 4 or 5% of people who want to go on a walk anyway, in general. And then I'm down to a further 4 or 5% of those walkers who want to concentrate on such a specific subject. So naturally, our tours are always very small, 8, 10, 12 people would be the norm, which is great for people because, we get to chat with each other, we get to walk around, we kind of become friends, temporary friends, you might say, for that couple of hours together. We meet in a famous bar called the International Bar on Wicklow Street, which is off Grafton Street. So it's very central. And we stick to the city centre, nice, easy pace. There's no exact route. I change the route every day just for my own sanity, because if you're covering the same route, you're going to kind of naturally start saying the same stories. So if you kind of challenge yourself as a guide to take a different route and to try and find new and interesting things to look at, it keeps it interesting for you, and therefore it should keep it interesting for the participant as well, right? So, what is a walk? I mean, we just, to be honest with you, I never went on a walk before. So I don't know whether I'm even doing it properly, but I guess we just stop at points and I talk and people throw a few questions. And then, great thing about Dublin is, and this, you've been here, we met before, people interact, people going by, Joe Public, they hear you saying something, they want to get involved. They also want to make sure you're telling the story properly as well. And Dubliners be very quick to point out to a guide if they're telling the wrong version of events. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I do. I encourage everyone to take the tour. If you get a chance, you're going over to Dublin. If you've got kids, if you've got a group of Hibernians, everybody, it works for everybody, and that's awesome. You're also an author. You a couple of years ago wrote a book about James Connolly. It's fantastic. Being a trade union man, like, that's something that's near and dear to my heart. You also wrote a book on the War of Independence and the guerrilla campaign, which is another one that I just absolutely love. That one in particular I find fascinating because it is a little more academic than a traditional book along those lines, but not without losing the ability to tell stories. It's not academic. And a lot of the academic books that I read for work and whatnot are very mundane, and they get very, they drab and they drag, and it's just kind of like, God, I just got to get through this for work. The one thing I love about your writing is, while it is academic and researched and thoughtful and correct, it also tells great stories. And that's something I think you just do naturally. Do you find that that's kind of how you best think about these things? Is that something you just have always done, or is it something where you have to kind of work at it?
Yeah, I think when I'm trying to write something, I have a person in mind who is interested in history, but who hasn't got the kind of concentration to read the 700-page tome,
Yeah.
I don't have that concentration, believe it or not. I find it nearly impossible to sit through a whole reading of 600 or 700 pages. It'll take me a long time. So what I like doing, I like trying to break things down and then sort of try and rebuild it a bit and make it understandable and make it interesting as well. Like, to me, Now, this is an old story that we always used to tell on the tour, and we don't even tell it anymore because, you know, I told it so many times, but it was one of the first great stories, I think, from 1916 about how twice a day in St. Stephen's Green, there was a ceasefire so the park keeper, Jem Carney, could come out and feed the little ducks. So then the violence would resume. Now, it's just, that's kind of like the first story I kind of remember from teenage years, nearly thinking this is really interesting, whereas other people might be going, oh well, that's not really what people want to hear. They want to hear what rank so and so had in you know, the British Army, whereas it's the human stories, I think, that are always much more interesting. I mean, I like a bit of detail, like you mentioned a couple of my books, but one book I wrote is called 1916, The Rising Hand Book. And it's kind of all facts, loads of facts, right?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to kind of nail down a lot of things. So, I mean, you couldn't be doing a tour with that book because it's kind of, it's too dry, you know? So a
Sure.
tour has to be naturally, it has to grab people's attention, I suppose. That's the point, you know?
Well, it's funny. I think you're 100% right. It's this. The facts are great and they're necessary, and I don't disagree with that. But when you go to the pub with your buddies, you're not going to tell them about the lieutenant that, you know, and the outfit that he had on and how his buttons, whatever. Like, you're going to tell them about stopping the fight to allow this guy to feed ducks. Like, that's the stuff that we would all, at least for me and my friends, which I was talking to a buddy of mine about doing this conversation and about your podcast. And he said, I love that podcast. It's like getting a beer and having a conversation as opposed to a lecture about historical stuff. And that, I made a note of it because I just thought that's the perfect way. Your podcast, Revolutionary Ireland, which is available and people can access it wherever you get your podcast, is this great storytelling of historical revolutionary Ireland. My favorite episodes, you did a couple on James Connolly, who I've already touched on and whatnot, but you did the O'Reilly, you did Terrence McSweeney's Hunger Strike, which I thought was amazing. You did Women of the Revolution. So it isn't just your normal garrison going down, you know, or the stories that are very known. Like, you kind of have gone in a much different way about a very familiar topic. And I think it's fantastic. Was that intentional? Is that the stuff that you just kind of thought, this is my niche? Is that...
Well, you know what? I thought about doing a podcast for maybe a few years, and I didn't listen to many podcasts really. And the lockdown that we got here in Ireland about March 2020, I kind of hummed and hawed for a while, and then when it went into April, I was going, okay, I got to do this. And by May, then it was up and running. To be honest with you, I thought I was kind of a little bit too out of that world of technology. I didn't know that I'd be able to kind of pull it off, but I spoke to a few Dublin podcasters who put me right, sent me in this direction and that direction. And eventually, anyway, you know, once you do it a few times, then you get quite used to it. But it was a very steep learning curve, all right, as to how to go about it, you know. But I guess I'm not the only person who set up a podcast during the lockdown. I think there was some joke in the paper, like, you know, 60% of Irish males have set up a podcast during the lockdown. Some joke like that, you know. So I was laughing at that. But again, there are Irish history podcasts out there, but there was none, as far as I'm aware, that really concentrated on just the revolutionary aspect from 1798 right up to, and I intend to get there at some stage. You know, I want to do, say, the hunger strikes in 1981, you know. So yeah. It's nice to be able to jump into any area. I mean, I haven't even gone near the Fenians yet. That's a whole area that I'll enjoy exploring as well. Recently, I went back and did one on 1798, you know, and it's great for me as well to delve into an area that I wouldn't always have kind of had the luxury of time to do. So yeah, we're all time rich at the moment, which is well, I'm time rich. Maybe you're not, Jay. You're a hard working guy.
Now, I'm curious though, where, like, do people give you ideas? Are you reading stuff and then just kind of like, you know what, like, I think that's, like, how is it you decide on topics? Because you do an amazing job of telling all these great stories. And I'm always like, God, where does he find this stuff? Like, how does he?
Well, you know what, Jay? First of all, I have an addiction to buying Irish history books and putting them on my shelf and swearing that someday I'm going to get through that book, right? So I have a pretty nice library of books that I haven't managed to get through yet. And not that there's anything wrong. I mean, many cultures believe you should be surrounded by books. Whether you read them or not is irrelevant. But it's nice now to be able to kind of look up on the shelf sometime and go, okay, here, you know, Wolfe Tone. Let's try him. Or my own favorite was the Jimmy Gralton one. I enjoyed researching that. Jimmy Gralton was, like yourself, a great union man, and he spent some time in the United States as well, and he ended up being exiled out of Ireland by the Catholic Church in the 1930s. And I kind of found that very interesting because it made me think about James Connolly, who, if he had lived, would have been exiled out of Ireland by an anti-communist, anti-socialist church in the 1930s. You know, it's a sort of a fascinating area that I never really explored before. So it's great to jump in there. How I decide what to do, I don't know. It just, sometimes people send an email and say, hey, I hope you're going to do something on, you know, Frank Ryan or something like that. So, you know, that lodges there in the back of my head. And then someday I'll get around to doing Frank Ryan, you know?
That's awesome. So I've alluded to it. I've mentioned it several times, but there's no way I'm going to let you get out of this conversation without sharing a few stories and talking through some things, because I just absolutely love it. So would you please talk just for a few minutes about the historical connections between the United States and Ireland, and just kind of in a broad overview, just so people can kind of understand, and then some specifics, if you would.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I'm always saying this to people who come from the States to come on a tour, that we realize there's that great connection that stretches back even before the Great Hunger, but really the so-called famine of 1845 to 1852, which saw millions of people leave this island in terrible circumstances, ended up making a life for themselves over in the US. Some made it, some didn't. They got involved in the American Civil War on both sides. And in the aftermath, they really built up the United States to a great extent. And I think the Irish were great contributors to what makes up the American character today. And Wolfe Tone was over in the United States, and Tone didn't really get on with the Americans in 1795. But as I said in my podcast, they were a different sort of American at the time, because at this stage, the Catholic Irish hadn't come in their droves yet to improve their Dutch characteristics, you might say. But Tone wrote a few letters home to Ireland in which he very much complained about the American character, saying that they were the worst of the English and the Dutch. But he was involved in a little bit of a land deal over there, and it went wrong, and that tainted him a little bit. Also, the heat, he couldn't stand the heat. He was in, what do you call it, Philadelphia, you know, and at that stage it was a swamp, and the swamp hadn't been drained, to use a modern phrase, and there was yellow fever going on. So he went to France, like, with relish. He couldn't wait to get there. He couldn't wait to get away from the States. Then you take someone like James Connolly, who for the first time in his life, he made a few dollars over in the US, and he really enjoyed his time there. You know, he got involved in unions like the IWW. He was New York organizer for the IWW. He complained about the heat himself. He did a few lecture tours in the States, and in once he wrote back to one of his friends, I think it was Matheson in Scotland. He said, it is frightfully hot here, but the Americans tell me it's exceptionally cool. It seems hell will be a terrible place for us Irish, another injustice to old Ireland, you know. So, but Connolly missed Ireland an awful lot, and that's of course why he came back in 1910. Well, initially to come on a lecture tour, but he ended up staying over there. But he got a great training in the US. But my favorite connection between America and Ireland centers around the contribution that the Choctaw Nation made. I think it was $170 they contributed, and they sent it to the Friends, the Quakers in New York, who then organized it to come to be donated to Ireland. Who, you know, they themselves had only been on the Trail of Tears, or organized by Andrew Jackson, the son of Irish immigrants himself. And that beautiful connection did a lovely circle there when I think it was the Navajo were trying to raise money there during the lockdown, because they were suffering terribly from COVID. And I think $3 million came from Ireland, from Irish people to the Navajo. And I think the Hopi as well. But, you know, because Irish people remember the Choctaws' beautiful, generous, kind donation to them when both people were at their lowest.
Yeah, that's one thing about the pandemic that has been special to me has been some of the stories that have come out over time, and the money going back to Navajo country is a big deal. That was a very beautiful experience. So now, can I have you tell stories about the Irish influence in the United States? You talked about the fact that Wolfe Tone was here. You've talked about James Connolly being here. Can you talk about how Ireland has influenced the United States?
Well, I think in many ways, because the Irish were a persecuted nation and in essence a colony, I think they brought to America a sense of watching out for injustice. And it's not always true, but I like to think that a lot of Irish Americans that I do meet have a strong sense of injustice and seem to support the same sort of causes that I myself would support. Now, it's not always true, but for the most, I think that characteristic shines through today. But you know, other aspects of our influence in America. I mean, we're the only nation that gets one day in the White House, like the 17th of March. There's no other nation who get to take over the whole of the US for one big green celebration, which, you know, we used to call it St. Patrick's Day, but now it's become then it became St. Patrick's Weekend, and then it became St. Patrick Week. So like it's a big festival here, but it's not the biggest in the world. You know, I think Savannah, Georgia, and New York's parades and Boston as well, far bigger than the Dublin parades. So there's that influence there as well. I suppose the connection between Irish America and the revolutionary movement in Ireland is very strong as well, and has been strong throughout the really from the 1860s with the Fenians right up to more modern times as well.
Wow. It's funny. I have never thought about it in context of we are the only that get our own day in the White House, or and I would encourage you to go to Kansas City's parade if you ever get a chance. I don't want to let Savannah and New York City and Boston get too far ahead of the home city there. No, it's that's good. So let me ask you this. Given all of your historical experience and your research and kind of just everything, your own thoughts, your own impressions, specific to Ireland, what do you think that the future holds for Ireland as a nation?
Well, you know that old Chinese proverb that people often say, may you live in interesting times. These are very interesting times for us in Ireland, because we see finally that a united Ireland is not only on the horizon, but we're getting closer and closer. And it's clear that the Tory party in England, who are the most untrustworthy people in the entire planet, have lied to the DUP and are hanging them out to dry. And the border doesn't exist. The border is on the sea at the moment. All these things that Brexit promised, and that, let's face it, the DUP campaigned for, to the extent that they even, took out a huge advertisement in a London newspaper, paid for with very dark money, I might add. But it's coming home to roost. And they see there's much more potential in a united Ireland that will be an egalitarian state and will guarantee their rights. People in Ireland don't care what religion you are anymore. And if anybody thinks that this state, this republic that we create, a 32 county republic, will be, a Catholic republic, they're seriously wrong. We will have a new Ireland, hopefully, that will be a welcome to all. And James Connolly said 100 years ago, well, 124 years ago, in 1896, he said, I hope someday Ireland will be a beacon light to the oppressed nations of the world. And I'd love to see an Ireland like that, where we could shine out idealism as opposed to a divisive nation. And I'm very glad to see a change in the States now as well. And I hope for a little bit of healing going on over there, and, a little bit of encouragement from other nations like ourselves to sort of say, you were going in the wrong direction there for a little bit. Let's pull it back and try and remember what the original intention of, our republics was supposed to be about.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You meet a guy on the street, you meet an American on the street. What is something that you would encourage them? I want to learn more. Like, what do you encourage them to do? Do you encourage them to read more? Do you encourage them to, check out this movie, or what is it that you would recommend to anyone?
Well, movies are great. Books are great. My favorite movies from the period would include The Wind That Shakes the Barley, an absolute tour de force. I could watch that movie 365 times a year if I had to, Then Michael Collins, that movie with it's okay-ish, like it's kind of very historically, it borrows a lot, it's a poem as opposed to a history book, right? But if they're in Ireland, God, there's an array of books to get your hands on. I love Tim Pat Coogan's books personally. From the early days, I used to love them, right? Because I always thought he was very readable. There's an array of historians out there now. It's easy to just Google them. But for me to come to Dublin, if you don't get on a tour with me, I'm not going to get mad with you. But do go to Kilmainham Jail, which is a spiritual journey. Like I don't want to sound very hippy dippy, but when you walk through those dark corridors and you think about those men and women that were held in there before they were executed, it'll send shivers down your spine. Glasnevin Cemetery, wonderful place. My old friend Shane McTomash set up the tours out there. So, you know, I like to think those are two very necessary things to do in Dublin. But then there's other people who say, oh, well, you know, go and see the Book of Kells. That's great as well. But if you want to, if you want to get a little bit of revolutionary history, put the other two on your list.
I will do that when I come back, when pandemic is lifted. I got to do it. Before I let you go, one last thing. Can you please tell the story of the Tommy guns?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Please do. I love this story, and I've got somebody who I know for a fact is watching, so I want this story to be told.
Well, you know what? Actually, I love the Tommy gun. I have a photograph of myself as a kid with a Thompson submachine gun. It's a plastic one, but I carried it around as much as I could. Actually, I think it was my cousin's, but I always used to grab it off him, you know. But the T gun, also known as the Irish sword, was developed by a fellow called Thompson. I think John Thompson was his name. And a great stalwart of Clon na Gael called Thomas Fortune Ryan. That was his name, Fortune, but he actually ended up making a fortune. He was one of the top 10 richest people in the US. But Fortune helped to pay for the development of this Thompson submachine gun that this guy had been working on. Initially, he hoped, Thompson hoped it would be grabbed by the ordnance section of the American Army, which he was working for at one stage during World War I. He wanted a broom sweeper, you know, a trench sweeper, or a trench broom, sorry. And anyway, they weren't interested in it. And when the war was over, he went back to working on it. And then the Clon na Gael members in America got wind of this, and they let Harry Boland know about it. And Harry went to investigate. And we ended up buying 650 of the very first Thompson submachine guns that rolled off the Colt Corporation, you know, Colt, because it uses a .45, you know, Colt ACP, I think it's called. So a few of them came in dribs and drabs, but they couldn't just say to the Thompson Corporation, 650 weapons for the IRA, please, you know. So they had to set up fronts, and they stored them in Clon na Gael warehouse, and eventually in June 1921, they loaded them on board a ship bound for Ireland. I think it was in Hoboken that the ship was, and everybody was paid off, everyone was sorted out. But then one guy, I think he was a Swedish guy, nothing against the Swedes, but he stuck his nose in where he shouldn't have been, and he opened one of the boxes and he raised the alarm, and the FBI and the customs came down. The fellow in charge of the raid was J. Edgar Hoover, who would end up becoming the head of the FBI. And anyway, they captured the weapons that were destined for Ireland at the height of the war against the British. What a difference that weapon would have made. 650 of them with loads of ammunition as well. It would have really turned a corner. But you see, of course, your listeners will know the truce happened on the 11th of July 1921. So the weapon was only really used once in Dublin in an attack against a British train. In fact, so effective was it that the British thought there was 40 or 50 fellas firing at them, you know, because the Thompson gun, of course, is a very rapid firing weapon altogether. So it did come to Ireland anyway in the Civil War. Because they won the case over in America, and the judge ruled that they were legitimately purchased, and they came over to Ireland in dribs and drabs, and they were used in the Civil War by both sides, by the Free State and by the Republicans. And then right up until the border campaign, and right up until the 1970s as well. I spoke to a few people in Belfast who remembered the Thompson gun, or the chopper is what they nicknamed it there, And there's a photograph from the 1980s of an event when the IRA scuttled an English boat in just off Derry, and one of the volunteers is carrying a Thompson T gun. I think that was, I can't remember, I think that was 1982 or 83 or something like that. So that's the latest. By then, of course, the Armalite had become the weapon of choice, and the Tommy gun was sort of shunted aside, but a very iconic weapon, I suppose.
It's that story always gets me, and I blame the Swedes. I'm going to go ahead and just say it. I'm going to blame the Swedes because, guys, just one guy. But no, it's a wonderful story, man. You tell it really well. I had to get it in there, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in and sit down with us. I know you've got a lot of things going on. I definitely want to encourage everybody to check out his walking tour. But until then, jump on his podcast. It is just like what you saw without me. I mean, that's the only thing I could say. Like, it's great stories. It's fascinating information. It's fun detail. It's lively the whole time. So I encourage everybody to jump on and download them and become a friend of Sinn Féin's, but also support Lorcan and everything he's doing. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Jay, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Really lovely to chat. And hopefully someday I'll see you in Dublin, and we'll what's that phrase you like to say over there? We blow the froth off a glass of beer or something like that. But I look forward to it anyway. And all the best to all your listeners as well. Okay.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it as well. So again, thank you for tuning in, and we will look forward to seeing you next time. Slán.